What's up, guys? My name is Paramoto959. If you're new to this channel, I do motorcycle reviews and topic videos. Today I want to tell you guys why the Panigale 959 is worth $16,000. This is my 2018 Panigale 959. This is an Arctic White with red wheels. This is an upgrade. I think it's an additional $500 above the sticker price. It's out the door about $16,000. I know you'll get it here and there for a little bit cheaper or a little bit more expensive, but generally you're probably expecting to pay about $15,000 to $16,000 for a bike like this stock. I've only done a couple things to it so far. I've added a ram mount, I've added the comfort seat, and I've added a tank protector, and other than that, it's bone stock. A little stats for you. The listed dry weight in the manual is 377 pounds, 430 pounds with a full tank of gas. It's advertised at 157 horsepower and about 80 foot-pounds of torque. This bike is basically like last generation Superbike quick, right? So the last generation Superbikes were above 150, between 150 and 170 horsepower. This one kind of falls in between, and this is the little Panigale. From here you go to the 1299 and to the V4. The 1299 is going to be phased out eventually, so the V4 is going to be the big daddy bike for Ducati going forward. This is the little version of the 1299. It has all the stylings of the 1299, but it has a smaller displacement engine. Personally, I like this displacement over the 1299. I think anything over a grand, over 1,000 cc's on a Panigale, this bike is very user-friendly in traffic. Everything about it is just set up to be a commuter bike, something easy to ride. Ducati purposely wanted to get the 600cc market with this bike. There are some things that Ducati did specifically to get the 600cc riders. One is to have the power delivery, that of which a 600cc rider will be comfortable with, and that's, you know, it's pretty torquey down below, but that's the twin speaking for it. But most of the power is found up high, just like a 600. Another thing that they did is this dual-sided swing arm is what a 600 rider will be more accustomed to. And those are things that Ducati did specifically to get the 600cc market. So another thing that will make a 600cc rider very comfortable on this bike is that it is extraordinarily flickable. I've given you the weights. It's 430 pounds with all the fluids in it, ready to ride. It doesn't have a chassis. Everything's basically bolted straight onto the engine as being a stress member of the bike, and that's something that Panigales are known for, is that, you know, going from the 1199 and the 1299 and the 959 is that the engine is actually a stress member of the motorcycle, and that gets the weight down. There is no actual frame for this motorcycle. That is a subframe simply for the wheel, but the engine itself acts as the frame for this motorcycle. That does a couple things for you. That improves the maneuverability of the bike, keeps the weight down, and it makes it very flickable. It's something that most 600 riders will say that they really like about the 600 is how flickable it is. This bike is just as flickable, but it has 57 more horsepower than a standard 600. Generally, I would tell people that if they're comfortable on a 600, you're going to be comfortable on this bike. It's just everything's easy about it. Everything's set up to be as easy as possible. And that's what Ducati actively wanted to do with this bike. So you might tell me, you know, hey man, so $16,000 is a lot to spend on not even the big Panigale. But I will say that there's, you know, things that you get with this bike that you don't really get on most 600s, all right? First of all, the styling is on point. This is, you know, generally considered to be one of the best looking motorcycles that is out there today. I mean, honestly, the Panigales are some of the best looking and sounding motorcycles that you can truly buy. You know, this is all user preference, but generally considered to be one of the best looking bikes out there. There is some other things that you get with this bike that you would normally have to pay for. One is obvious, the Brembo brakes. So it comes stock with Brembo brakes. These aren't the ones that got recall not long ago. These are actually safe from the recall. You don't get the Olin suspension, but you get the Brembo brakes. I would take the Brembos over the Olin suspension, because honestly, like, I'm not gonna, you know, the majority of riders are not gonna take this bike to the track. This is not going to be a track bike. This is going to be a fun bike, a weekend bike, a commuter bike. You don't really need you know, world-class suspension to ride your bike to the office or to work or to the coffee shop. You just need something that works. But brakes are actively something that is going to save your life. So I would take the Brembos over the Olin suspension any day. Speaking of brakes, it also comes stock with ABS on all the models. The paint is corrected from the 899. This is the matte finish bike. It is a little bit dirty because I've been riding the crap out of it today. And the 899 was known as not having a clear coat. So on this bike, they actually changed that. This finish actually holds up very well. There's about 4,000 miles on this bike. I've had it since last December. The paint has held up extraordinarily well. When I wash it, it looks brand new again. And that's something that the 899 just didn't have. I knew watching a review video that somebody actually, you know, had ridden their bike for like 500 miles, their 899 Panigale, for about like 500 miles, and they noticed the gas tank was all scratched out already. So that's something that they fixed with the 959 moving forward. Another thing that you get stock on this bike that you don't normally get stock on most motorcycles is not this ram mount that I have, but the steering dampener. When you have a sport bike, it's very important to have a steering dampener. All you have to do is YouTube instances of tank slappers. That's when the bars go back and forth violently and sometimes can shake you totally off your bike at, you know, normally going pretty fast speeds. So this bike comes totally stock with a steering dampener. You don't have to go and have this installed. You don't have to do anything extra. It just comes with it. So another thing that you'll notice about this bike is it comes actually with Pirelli Corsa tires. It doesn't come with garbage tires like 9 out of 10 motorcycles come out with nowadays. You know, you'll typically get like something like off-brand, like Road Warriors or something like that with a brand new motorcycle. On this bike, you get Pirelli Corsa tires. These are very good tires. These have about 4,000 miles on them, and you can see, you know, they still have some tread left on them. I'm probably gonna have to replace them by next year, but you know, I'm gonna get a full season out of a rear tire on a Superbike. So I mean, I'm not complaining about it. Another thing that you get fully stocked from this bike out the box is a quick shifter. The quick shifter works fantastically. Anything on a Panigale is going to like being beat on. So the quick shifter works better the higher revs that you get. I think that's generally true for most you know, most quick shifters, whether or not you put it on an R6, an R1, a CBR 600, they're going to like when you beat on them, when you get the revs up higher. You know, this bike is going to act better after, you know, you get past 5,000 RPMs. It's going to just, you know, take on a new life. The quick shifter works better when you go faster, but it works at low RPMs as well. And that's something, again, that you don't have to spend any money on. It just comes stock with it. So another thing that you get with this motorcycle is a pretty stout electronics package. When you turn the bike on, you actually go through, it goes through its checks, and you have several different modes. You have sport mode, which I typically keep the bike in. You have wet mode, and you have race mode. All these modes change the electronic controls. Typically, I keep it in sport mode just because it keeps me out of trouble. I keep it in sport mode, and I leave race mode for when I'm feeling a little bit saucy that day. The things that this actually controls is your engine braking, how much engine braking you get, your traction control, and your ABS. All these modes will dictate how much intervention that this bike will give before, how much leeway you get from this bike before it intervenes. So in race mode, it's gonna be full on mode. The bike's gonna be like, okay, I hope you know what you're doing, and it's gonna send you out, and it's gonna give the least amount of interventions. Coming down the sport mode, it's gonna be more tuned for commuting and stuff like that, trying to make your life a little bit easier, but also watching out for you, being your safety net a little bit. And then you go down to wet mode. Wet mode's the only mode that actually decreases the horsepower of the bike. It goes from 157 horsepower down to 130 horsepower, and then it tweaks all those things in there, and it just makes it more intrusive. But it does so with guys that, you know, you're on wet roads, and you know, you're going to need it. You're going to need, you know, more traction control. You're going to need more, you know, intervention with the ABS and all that stuff so that you can stay safe on the road. One thing to note, sport mode is very smooth. Race mode turns this bike into a monster. The throttle response, this is a ride-by-wire throttle, becomes brutal, and you get the power immediately. Instead of a smooth progression, it becomes immediate. And that's the whole thing about electronics. You introduce electronics into a motorcycle, you have almost no delay in anything. So you got a ride-by-wire throttle, you put this thing into race mode, you're immediately going to have power everywhere. It is fun. And that's why I keep it in sport mode, to keep myself out of trouble with basically the police, and, you know, I don't kill myself out on the road. One thing to note about the modes is that the modes are fully customizable. You can take the modes and you can make any sort of customization that you want, and you can save it, and they're all programmable. You can save multiple, you know, programmable modes in there depending on your feelings. This is becoming standard in the industry, but being the little Panigale, you still get all those features. And they're pretty fun to mess around with. I keep it pretty stock. I like things simple. I like to not mess around with stuff. But if you're one of those like tech savvy people that like to mess around and like to get the most out of your motorcycle, this bike could be the bike for you. So from here on, I think we need to take the bike for a ride to really appreciate this motorcycle for what it is. So for most people, the attraction to a Panigale is going to start at the looks. And it's true for me. But the one thing that really gets me is the way that this bike sounds. It has a distinct startup sound. It has a distinct startup sound, a distinct exhaust note. It's got dual underbelly exhausts along the bottoms, and they sound really good coming from stock. It's not overbearingly loud. It's not quiet by any means. It's enough to get you noticed on the road, but also not enough to deafen you as well. And it just sounds so amazing. Like, it almost sounds like a V8 engine is the biggest thing that I could probably compare it to. Is that this bike sounds like a V8. You know, not unlike how an R1 with the cross-plane crank system, it sounds like a big V8. You know, and I would honestly say that the R1 and the Panigales are the best sounding motorcycles there are. I mean, if you just listen to this bike, and it's just brutal low end. Like, if you're a bass player, you're gonna enjoy this motorcycle because it's got just a brutal low end. And then when you get it up and you're quick shifting and you're banging it through the gears, oh man, nothing sounds like a Panigale. So this is a good point to note that when you're in the dark, the screen becomes lit, and it's this nice soft blue white-ish backlight. It's very nice. It's not a color display, but it's a very crisp display. You also have options for time, total odometer, multiple trips, trip time, and then you have another section down below. I typically keep it on temperature, ambient temperature, fuel consumption, consumption average speed. So you have multiple settings that you can do with this bike. So generally when you're riding around town with this bike, you're gonna get noticed, and people like to stare at you. Well, that's because of this beautiful sound. This bike is a beast. It just sounds pissed off. This bike sounds stock like you owe it money, is what it sounds like. It just reminds me of, like, you know, just a brutal beast is what it sounds like. And then you can enhance that even more if you feel like, by getting a Terminioni or an Acro system or something like that. We'll actually change the exhaust note a little bit. Personally, I prefer it stock. It's going to save you about $3,000, and it just still sounds amazing. Another thing that you'll notice about this motorcycle over another motorcycle that you may ride is that everything feels mechanical. Like, you have a wet clutch system. This isn't this isn't like a regular clutch for a Japanese sport bike. It's, everything just feels mechanical, and there's just positive Okay, this person doesn't know where they're going. And there's just positive, just like the clutch feels very mechanical. Like it doesn't so much feel heavy, but you know you're working it, you know? The brake lever, it feels very positive, very sharp with those Brembos. Every button that you press has a positive click or a positive clunk. You know, the gearbox has, when you shift it with the quick shifter or when you don't, has solid positive clunks every time you shift a gear, you know? And you know when you're in gear with this thing, you know? It's not like you're gonna miss the shifts because you missed a gear or anything. And the shift lever, it kind of gives you, you know, a little bit of feedback too. Like you can clunk it down like you just heard. I'm sure you can hear that, you know, nice positive clunk. Let's see, using the quick shifter, you know when you got it into gear because you just feel it just hit, boom, gear, boom, gear. Everything's very mechanical. It reminds me of old school technology. And the way it does that, the way it reminds me of that is that, you know, nothing feels cheap on this bike. There's not a single thing on this bike that feels like Ducati cheaped out, you know? And it's just so flickable. Like, this bike it just wants to lean. It just wants to lean. It wants to get beat up. It wants to go fast. And it makes you go fast, to be honest with you. You know, it makes you want to go fast on this bike. It makes you want to just appreciate it. You know, if you know anything about the, you know, Italians, is that they have like race pedigree, and like, you know, Italians and Spanish people have really taken to motorsports very, very heavily. And you know, the testament to the Italians' involvement in motorsports is, you know, companies like Ducati and Aprilia, and also, you know, Lamborghini and Ferrari. There's so many. When you talk about how big Italy is and how many just companies make something with motorsports, I mean, think about how many, you know, motorcycle manufacturers come from Italy, from Ducati, Aprilia, you know, Motul, you know, Modus, you know, you can just go on and on, by Moda, you know, and you're talking about a very small country, the size of, you know, probably a couple of U.S. states put together, and you can just go on and on with, you know, just, you know, some of the most groundbreaking motorcycle and car manufacturers there are. There truly is passion in Italy for motorsports, and it shows with these motorcycles. They give a shit about what they do, and it shows every time you ride your bike. So when you're out here and you're riding your Panigale, there's a couple other things to take note on. One is the feel of the V-twin. This is technically called an L-twin motorcycle, but for all intents and purposes, it's a V-twin motorcycle. Think of it as a V-twin on its side. So we've gone over that as a stress member, which is something groundbreaking that Ducati did. You know, another thing that it does is just you feel it just thumping away as you're riding. Like, you can get these revs down, you know, pretty low, and you can just feel it just thumping away. Just big bore, just thumping away. 2 cylinders with almost 1,000 cc's of displacement, and it just feels so beastly. Another thing that you can't really quite describe to somebody that has never ridden a Ducati is the intention that you get from everybody around you. There is not a single time that I ride my Ducati Panigale that there isn't somebody eyeballing me really hard. There's not a single time where I'm not at a stoplight and I have somebody just staring at the bike. Just staring at the bike. And it's not just because I'm a guy out here talking to myself on camera, but it is genuinely because people, this is an eye-turning motorcycle. And it's eye-turning because it just, you hear it coming and then it's on you. And it's the complete package. It sounds like a beast. It looks fast. It looks fun. It's an inspirational bike to truly own. And that's where I'm going to leave you guys, is that the Ducati Panigale 959 is inspirational to own. It inspires you to go ride. It inspires you to ride hard. And that is why the Ducati Panigale 959 is worth $16,000. Thank y'all. If you haven't done it, please make sure to like the video, subscribe down below. Thank you so much for watching. Deuces.